Alex here with a legal nuts and bolts video on global government. I guess they also call it like New World Order and One World Government, stuff like that. It might surprise people that I was going to do this video, but this is actually something that intersects with high conflict child custody in a pretty substantial way and other types of areas of law. I'm not going to talk about this from the perspective of the people and the motivations behind it. There's a lot of channels that do a really good job at that. I'm just going to talk about this from the perspective of like a system. And I'm going to start with the good stuff and then I'll end the video with a lot of the drawbacks. But the most obvious positive situation, I guess you could say, that could come from one world government has to do with high conflict child custody cases, more specifically parents who abduct their children to other countries. It's more common than people think. It's especially common with somebody who's actually from the country that they're fleeing to. So I actually have a video on this topic, but if you have a child with somebody who's born in, and especially if they lived for a long time in the other country, it's a huge risk that if they are a high conflict ex, that they will actually exploit that and flee with the child back to their home country. Um, there are treaties that are supposed to protect against it, but they don't often work. In fact, there are two people that I personally know um, who actually went through this. And it's one thing for the other parent to run off to the other country and just deprive you of custody and time with your child. But it's another thing when they add insult to injury and actually get child support orders against you. And that's what happened to both of those individuals. One of them fled to Poland and she was able to get child support orders from Poland and also in the US. And that parent hasn't seen his children in, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. And then there's another one whose ex fled to Sweden, and that one's actually in the papers here. Several articles came out in Las Vegas on that case. There's actually court orders from Nevada that the mother in Sweden is ignoring, and the nation of Sweden has expressly refused to recognize and enforce the court orders from Nevada. And they also have imposed child support orders against the father. I don't know if it's like $1,000 or $2,000, but it's pretty substantial. So, yeah, let's talk about the good things first. I know that this is kind of one of those trigger topics for a lot of people because it's so political. There's some people that think it's a conspiracy, but actually, it's not, because they actually talked about it pretty openly for a while, for several years. Now that it's kind of a negative sort of, there's a negative connotation to the idea, so now they don't talk about it publicly as much. But it's not really like it's a secret. It's there as an idea of putting the entire world under a single government. Anyway, the first advantage I just went through, which has to do with high conflict child custody cases and children that are taken to other countries. If you had a single world government, you wouldn't have that issue. The entire world would be under the same law and authority, and so a parent couldn't really flee to another country and hide. The second thing has to do with criminal prosecutions and tourism. So people would be able to go to other countries and know that the same general principles of law would protect them. Stuff like jury trials and beyond reasonable doubt standard. I'm sure there would be very basic legal principles like that that would most likely be adopted worldwide. It's not something that really a lot of people disagree on. A lot of people in multiple countries, most of the countries, I guess, would agree that the state has to prove the case against you and you have a right to a jury trial and stuff like that. So it would probably cause a decrease in anxiety for people going into other countries. Just in case something was to happen to them, they would probably feel more confident that they would be protected and wouldn't be turned into a political pawn. These aren't common situations. I think especially not as common as compared to somebody taking a kid and running to another country. That's way more common, but just something to think about. And then there is the enforcement of judgments. That's another common issue. More so with giant companies, less so with individuals, but it does happen to individuals where they will need to sue somebody because something happened to them, and then the person will flee to Mexico or China or something like that. And either the country protects them and refuses to recognize the judgment, or the country just has real problems with enforcement, which is actually more common than people would think. There are a lot of countries that would recognize the judgment, but they just don't prioritize garnishing wages and seizing money from bank accounts. It's just not something that they really think that it's important for that particular country. And so there's a lot of people who will hide in another country, and they just won't ever pay the debt back because they know that there's just no way to force them to. So again, that's more of a problem with giant companies than it is with individuals. And I guess that would cover most of the good things from a legal perspective. I guess from a military perspective, that would be the end of all wars, because there wouldn't be any nations to have wars with each other. There would probably still be armed conflicts, but it would be more, I don't know, insurgencies and insurrections and rebellions and stuff like that, not necessarily two giant countries going at it like we had in World War I, World War II. Not even just two countries, a ton of countries. The bad stuff, which I think is what most people are waiting for. This is a really unpopular idea with most people, and it's for good reason. It's because there is this track record in, I guess you could call it society, humanity, whatever, of a larger group telling a smaller group what to do, and if they don't like it, too bad. And that's something that you don't even have to go out of the United States to see this. This happens in the United States all the time. You have states that enact certain statutes, and you have the federal government that will sometimes, trample over the state. And I guess a common hot button topic would be guns. Some states have populations that are heavily against it, and other states have populations that are heavily for it. And there's a constitution that prevents the federal government from, and even the state governments from, restricting it. But you could imagine that if the states were dissolved and it was really just down to the entire country, most likely there wouldn't be firearms, or they'd be strictly limited because most of the population seems to be against them. Even if you think maybe people are in favor of pistols and stuff, there are much more opposition to assault rifles, long rifles, machine guns, etc., which is not consistent throughout the country. There are plenty of states that allow you to own a machine gun. It's a thing. Same thing with drugs like marijuana. There are some states that are much more conservative, much more religious, and heavily opposed to it. They have laws that ban it. Other states now are allowing it. There's even, I think, Oregon allowing or decriminalizing all drugs, not even just marijuana. And so, again, that's another example of regional sort of opinions that are not consistent with the national opinion. And there's other stuff like abortion. There's states now trying to ban it again. And there is a federal government, not necessarily through legislation, but through the judiciary, making it unlawful to restrict abortions. And so there's another example of sort of a national body that's supplanting the desires of a local body. So same thing with the world. There would be countries that would be very paranoid that the world government would say, your desires and wants in that region don't matter. We're going to make this rule that's going to apply to the whole world, and if you don't like it, too bad. So I think it's a very valid fear. Not only do I think it's a valid fear, I think it would most likely occur. I think exactly what it is people are afraid of is exactly what would happen, and that's probably why this idea will be unpopular for generations and generations until the opinion or the perspective changes that a global electorate won't supplant the rights of a regional, or I guess you could call cultural population. So, I think if it was something that was ever going to work, there would be a global constitution and cultural constitutions for regions that would be guaranteed to have certain rights. But right now, with so many people afraid of law and distrustful of it, and distrustful of the idea of losing control over their particular region or locality, even if there was a good system in place, people just wouldn't understand it or they wouldn't trust it, and so it really wouldn't matter. I don't want to spend much more time on this video because then it's going to kind of wander into a sort of a thought. What do they call it? Like a thought project. There's a name for this where you kind of just discuss theories, but the chance of it becoming real wouldn't happen. I think the first portion of the video is going to be the most useful for my viewers, is that it really does tie into high conflict child custody. It really does tie into the issue of child abduction, which I'm sure some viewers are going to post in the comments. This is exactly what happened to me. It's probably especially a problem with people who are in Europe, because those countries are a lot smaller. It's a lot easier to bounce around between countries there, and possibly some of the countries that have really weak systems in place, like in South America and Africa, where there just isn't really a good legal system in the first place. And so it's an interesting topic. I wanted to cover it because the idea of treaties and foreign relationships between governments and stuff like sovereignty comes up sometimes on the channel, and something like global government would solve all those problems. But as I mentioned at the latter portion of the video, just create a bunch of new problems, and there's probably no trust at all between ordinary people and the governing classes to make something like that popular. I hope that this video was useful to my viewers. I hope it helped you think about the topic in a different way, because I know that right now it's kind of knee-jerk that the topic of global government is instantly bad. And I do think that it's sad that those that rule haven't really thought this through, and haven't thought that sometimes the opinion of a local or regional group should be respected, because it's not always about the numbers. There's plenty of examples in history where a majority abused or infringed upon the rights of a minority just because they could, because there's more of them, less of you, and if you don't like it, too bad. And that's a bad attitude. It's not a good attitude to have. It's not a good attitude to rule with, but right now that's what people feel, and so that's why nobody trusts this idea. As I mentioned, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.